Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Mariologier, calling to you from the depths of insomniac despair. This is Vile Cacti Sodomy, a ramble on the empathy gap. In this weird and strange haystack world of ours, where all manner of elusive illusion reign supreme, one figment of fantasy tower above all other. That would be the illusion, the phenomenal fantasy, of some grand global network of conspirators aimed at making men the privileged sex. This is dubbed the nefarious patriarchy, thriving and reveling on the subjugation and enslavement of women. The claim that the voices and concerns of women are never heard is so ridiculous given the state of things that willful blindness is the only possible reason for people to make this claim. Personally, I much prefer the reptilian conspiracy to that of the patriarchy. I think it makes way more sense. The fact of the matter is that the shrieking tunes of the feminist death squads and marching bands are heard and given credence no matter how absurd and ridiculous their claims. No matter how much their statements are debunked time and again by people far more clever than both them and myself. If it is a problem predominantly facing women, you can bet your pontificating ass and snivelling snoot that heaven and hell will be moved in order to fix it, or at the very least alleviate it. Even if it is a ridiculous first world problem easily mended by taking some more responsibility for oneself. As is the case with the horribly sexist air conditioning, a non-issue and personal pet peeve of mine, remedied quite easily by the woman or women in question putting on more clothes. Imagine that. Considering that the dress codes for men in workspaces where air conditioning exists tend to be far more rigid than they are for women, business suits of course being the only acceptable form of clothing for a professional man, there is little wonder that men in these workspaces would be far warmer than the women in these spaces. A business suit is a hot thing, warm as the devil himself, and not being allowed to wear anything but this suit, no shorts, no shirts, no nothing of the sort, all to give the veneer of professionalism sorely needed by the company. It would be fair to say that the air conditioning should keep the space cool and that the woman being cold should maybe do something as simple as putting on a sweater or wearing pants or something of that nature. Radical notion, I know. But that is what happens when you get radicalized by the horrible patriarchal reptile forces of the internet. This is, of course, an incredibly sexist and horribly misogynist thing to say, as women should be free to do whatever the hell they want to do, even if that includes blaming other people for their problems or feeling a slight chill in the workplace when the only thing needed to do is to put on one more layer of clothing. I assume this will be held forth as a shining example of a man trying to control what women do with their bodies, not taking into account the dress codes for men in these spaces. This does not matter, obviously, because men being uncomfortable in the stifling heat and lack of oxygen in the sauna-like room temperature that seems to be preferred by women everywhere is just another manifestation of primeval male toxicity calling for the governance and patriarchal regulation of female body temperatures. Where will it all end? At some point, men may be so rough and domineering as to keep the temperature of the room at a level where they are comfortable. Core blimey, governors, we can't have that now, can we? Men cannot, under any possible circumstances, be expected to be comfortable. Holy hell and shining madness. Soon you'll be expecting they be allowed to sit comfortably as well. Soon you'd be expecting men to sit in the manner their biology dictate. And we'd see a horrid rise in episodes of vile and violent manspreading. Best get that manspread combating chair of monumental stupidity, designed by a feminist apparently considered a hero by the frail and fragile forces of frantic and frazzled feminism, rolled out to meet and greet the world at large. Knock it into the law books. Manspreading to be punished by public castration. That sounds good. Yes! Slay, queen! And various other ululations of feminist preposterous pandering and self-congratulations, patting themselves on the back on their path towards irredeemable and superfluous obsolescence. Anyone not currently basking in the radioactive glow of unlubricated feminist sodomy lovingly delivered by the strap-on cacti dildo of some odd dominatrix should be able to see the lack of empathy where men are concerned scrawled across the crossword patterns of our wretched and decaying civilization. born as much from men being the disposable sex as it is from lobbying feminist activities and academic institutions indoctrinating young minds into the victim cult. It is everywhere. Right out there in the open for all the world to see. If only all the world were willing to see it. The pain of men is unfortunately taboo to the vast void of the world, and so men who suffer and who struggle are shunned. They are told that there is something wrong with them for being men, that they deal with their emotions all wrong, and so need to open up and talk about them, only to be met with ridicule, shaming, and God knows what when they do. Toxic masculinity causes men to not share their feelings and emotions, and fragile masculinity is the terminology of choice used to shame men when men do. Odd how that works. Almost as though the ideology and preposterous ideas therein are manufactured to paint this picture that men are wrong no matter what and how they do. See, women in general don't seem to want this emotional openness in a man. And men know this. More often than not, they know and learn this by experience, the moment they go from being boys to being men and get met with far less understanding and cozy comfort. So men learn how to process and handle their emotions on their own, in their own way, by and large. When being told that this is the wrong way to go about it, and being shown that trying to talk about their emotions the way the feminist-infused school of thought demand brings nothing but the same feminist-infused school of thought crashing down on them with all the horrid power of the ancient ones, the breaking point is closing in. And damaged people damage people. Snap, crackle, pop. Everyone has a breaking point. In seeing how much protest any and all conference aimed at the issues men face meet, not only by the awesome might and fury of the feminist forces, but also by society at large, so much so that they are shut down, forced to change venues, forced into obscurity, one cannot help but wonder how the claim that the voices of women are never heard can make any manner of sense. Nor how it makes any manner of sense that only the voices and concerns of men are heard. Consider the backlash to Cassie J's documentary The Red Pill, where genderless gender studies professors of apparently no ill repute prop up their terrified and trembling forms on television to completely and utterly lie about the men's rights movement and what it represents, sculpting clay models and straw men of men who want nothing but to be free to rape and plunder like Mongolian hordes. Consider television hosts in Australia admitting to not seeing the film, but bashing it nonetheless. Consider screenings of the film being shut down on feminist insistence. And tell me, with a straight face, that issues facing men are taken seriously, that only the voices of men are heard, to the detriment of women. When the voices of the men's rights movement are shut down at every turn, and men are being constantly bombarded with negative messages regarding their sexuality, their sex, and their masculinity, like the APA guidelines for dealing with men and boys, in which the finite and infant-like wisdom of the dominant ideology reigns supreme, putting into place the notion of masculinity as some form of toxic and destructive ideology. Ideology! The psychiatrists will then, of course, deal with the issues boys and men face when coming in to seek help by telling them that it is their masculinity, that is, their identity as boys and as men, that is the main problem facing them. Nothing more, nothing less. So one would have to wonder, why is the suicide rate of boys and men so high? Not that we hear that much about the suicide rate and how many men kill themselves, of course. Because women attempt suicide more, so that must be the focus point of our societies in which women are hated so much. Never taking into account that the women who attempt suicide survive and the men that kill themselves die. Not taking into account that women who attempt suicide may be crying for help, something that I absolutely believe should be taken seriously, but which is a far cry from actually dying by their own hand. Nor is it taking into account repeat attempts at suicide by the same woman, boosting the numbers some, or simple self-harm documented as suicide attempts. Nevertheless, it is painted as some preposterous problem facing women first and foremost, as are all issues. Even when men are most affected, it must be somehow twisted and turned so that women are the main victims. Men dying don't matter, because women didn't die. It makes perfect sense, of course, when one sex receives empathy and understanding and the other sex does not. Yet the claim is there. The empathy gap does not exist, as we all should well know by now. It is for the lack of the empathy gap that women who snap and kill their children or their partners prompt us to feel sorry for them, opening for dialogues of immense importance in regards to mental health and how horrible the state of women's mental health is. Women are, in other words, and by the insistence of the dominant feminist forces in our society, crazy. You will excuse me giggling like a rabid schoolgirl. In so doing, they are creating all manner of ways in which the partner of the woman may be made to be the perpetrator after the fact, being that he most assuredly abused her to the point of her snapping and killing him or their children or both. What a splendid thing. What a tremendous stroke of luck that he is dead then, and with no possible ability to defend himself. Victim blame much, you trite troglodyte. Sounds like the rhetoric of an abuser to me, but what the hell do I know? Men can't be abused by women after all, because feminism said so, and since they said it, it must be true. Proven, of course, by the severe lack of domestic violence shelters for men, or for boys. Given that boys above a certain age who are abused are not allowed within the premises of these shelters for women and their children fleeing the horrible and tyrannical patriarch at home. A son is only to be sheltered as long as he is a boy and not a man. For, when being a man, he clearly can take care of himself, as women are absolutely incapable of doing apparently. The train of ridiculous logic that follows is circular. There are few, if any, shelters for abused men. There are many shelters for abused women. Therefore, it follows that women are abused more and men are abused less. This is despite the fact that feminists have protested and done all in their power to not have shelters available for men. This goes all the way back to the first shelters created by Erin Pissy, a woman I have an immense respect and admiration for, and whose experiences I recommend any and all to read, in which she quickly learned that women who sought shelter were just as, if not more, abusive as the men from whom they sought shelter. She then tried to open a shelter for abused men, and got met by a campaign of harassment by the feminist forces that is difficult to believe in a society in which feminism is painted as a force of good and nothing but. But that is the way of revisionist history and historians. She who controls the past controls the present. She also controls the future. For the simplest and yet most profound example of the empathy gap, one could simply point to male genital mutilation being allowed and, in many cases, recommended, whereas female genital mutilation is illegal, in order to best showcase the glaringly obvious presence of said empathy gap. But that don't matter none, because mutilating the penises of baby boys ain't no problem. Boys don't have bodily autonomy, my little pumpkin, and that is quite alright. Nothing sexist or horrible about allowing one sex to be genitally mutilated at birth, shaming those who oppose it, and making it completely illegal for the other sex. Nothing wrong with using these severed foreskin in facial creams for the vanity of women either. This is just to be expected. Fresh baby facials for the women, and shame on you if you disagree, or find this a bit icky. These women have all the right in the world to smear severed baby foreskin on their wrinkly faces, you boorish blue-collar slobs. As if the genital integrity of boys mattered more than the unwrinkled countenance of some past her prime woman in superficial distress. Woe betide you, should you dare oppose the facial gluttony of the barbarian queen. Honk, fucking honk. I could go on and on about this. This is just a rambling introduction to the empathy gap, a roguish ballad sung by a bearded bard riddled with spontaneity, insomnia, and sudden bursts of insanity. There is a lot to unwrap, to ponder and consider in this silly world of ours. I will leave you with some more thoughts on incels, which I touched upon in an earlier piece, Shame and Ridicule on the Howling Plains of Twitter, available on BitChute, YouTube and my blog. Incels have been on my mind quite a lot lately, and I am pondering doing some larger piece on the phenomena of inceldom, if I find more thoughts on this accumulating within the vortex of my cranial madness. Norway has a television channel very much like the BBC, which of course is far more than a television channel now. funded by the population by force and the government by choice. It is also infected very much with the vampiric forces of regressive progressivism and the holy ghost of feminism, obviously making them less than unbiased, even when they claim that they are unbiased. That is the problem when people are so engulfed by their beliefs and convictions that they do not consider it properly. They do not see their own bias. This is a very human thing. For itself, there is nothing wrong with it. We all have confirmation bias one way or the other. It is wrong when something that everyone is forced by law to pay for does not represent the interests of the population in any objective way, mirroring only one set of beliefs, values and convictions and claiming this to be unbiased, thus coloring the mainstream view of the thing by presenting itself as nuanced and unbiased. Some years back now, they had a news article on their website about a woman in a wheelchair complaining that the lack of interest she received from men when sitting in a wheelchair as opposed to pictures where she was not in her wheelchair on Tinder was a form of sexual harassment in itself, as she felt herself ignored by men for being in a wheelchair. Hardly worth doing an article about, I thought then, and I think now. There followed a few lines about her being just as deserving of love as someone not wheelchair bound. Maybe she should have used some of that baby foreskin facial cream. That might have helped. Probably not though. Not with those legs. What sticks out here is, of course, that she sounds very much as though she is involuntarily celibate, forced into a state of permanent singlehood by forces beyond her control, as though she is one of those disgusting incels we've been hearing so much about. You know, the ones who feel as though they are entitled to companionship and to sex. Those horrible people whose situation in life has been turned into a quick and easy insult for disgruntled feminists and their orbiting white knights to pull out at their whim and fancy whenever arguments are lacking. If said incel is a man, of course. If a woman shows up and acts as though she is entitled to love, companionship and sex from men, she is met with empathy and understanding. To such a degree that woe is me type news articles pop up from the woodworks and make themselves heard to make us feel sorry for her and do all that we can in order that her plight of being single, that is, being an incel, is alleviated. For how could any man be so horrible as to have romantic and or sexual preferences on their own? Men are not allowed this, you see. If a woman shows interest in a man, the man is expected to reciprocate in kind, lest he be considered a superficial asshole. Does not matter whether the woman is fat, or in a wheelchair, or whatever it may be that throws the man off and makes him not turn on the testosterone-fueled rape cannon below his belt. If he shows no interest in her, if she shows interest in him, there is something wrong with him. Some would maybe call this behavior entitlement, but what do I know? The inverse does not apply. But that is part and parcel of life in the strange purgatorial afterlife we have inhabited since 2012. This is not the only article I have read in which female incels are shown care and compassion that male incels have never been shown, nor ever will be shown. I sent a complaint to this state-sanctioned, populous and government-funded channel of ours regarding this article. I worded this complaint properly, of course, thinking that, since I bloody well pay for this mass of propaganda and nonsense, I have every right in the world to complain. In this complaint, I asked them if they would publish the same kind of article were it a man complaining about, in essence, not getting laid due to circumstances beyond his control. They never replied, as they usually never do whenever I complain. I have sent them a few complaints in my time, only when their bias is clearly shining through, proving that they do not for one flat-farted second represent the interests of the people who are forced to pay for their spewing of biased bile. And there is that which is so strange to me, that mist floating out there on the horizon, within which all manner of ghosts and ghouls and terrors roam, that outpouring of empathy and understanding where women are concerned, that majestic lack of it where men are concerned. Men who feel a lack of companionship and of sex are scorned and shunned and ridiculed, are told they are not entitled to sex, nor are they entitled to a woman's time, which I admittedly agree with. I also agree that women are not entitled to sex, romance, companionship, or what have you. However, women who feel entitled to this are given empathy and understanding, are given a place in our government-funded public broadcasters of propaganda and sanitized trash to vent their frustrations in regard to this, to lay all the blame on men for not wanting to bang her, for not wanting to enter into a relationship with her for her being in a wheelchair. And it is not that I don't have empathy for her, I actually do, just as I have empathy and understanding for men who are in a similar situation to her. It is that society at large demonize men who are in that position, men who long for meaningful relationships, men who long for physical touch, who long for anything beyond the purely platonic. It is that our newspapers and our public broadcasters paint these men in a horrid light, as haters of women and as rapists in waiting, as potential mass murderers and whatever they've got to throw their way, while simultaneously making empathetic fluff pieces about women who act just in the same way that these so-called foul, horrid, basement-dwelling, neck-bearded, fedora-wearing incel bastards do. Women who feel entitled to sex, love, romance and relationships are to be listened to and understood, and be allowed to shame men for not wanting to fuck them, love them or caress them. Men who feel entitled to sex, love, romance and relationships are to be shamed and ridiculed for wanting to fuck women, be caressed or loved by women. And yet there is no empathy gap to speak of, and all men's dreams are torn asunder, and all men's love denied eternal, and all men's pain invisible, and all men's all lost, and still men are supposedly the ones whom all the world listen to. Thank you very much for watching. Here follows an outro most befitting a video of this nature, a blatant attempt at virtual panhandling. Should you wish to support this channel, as well as my blog and any further endeavours this strange path will take me on, there are a few ways you can do that. The easiest would be to like, share and subscribe, as well as clicking the sometimes functional notification bell. Having the message, such as it is, manspread and mansplained far and wide will do wonders. You could also support my rambling and barely contained insanity by buying my books, which are linked below. More books will be made available as time allows. I also have a Redbubble shop, linked below, where you can buy prints in various forms of some of the artwork presented in my videos. Or you can contact me through the contact form on my blog for original artwork, commissions or prints direct from the source, so to speak. Until next time, I am your humble bearded bard, Morea Legier, manspreading majestically beneath the steel sky of doom.